what is fear and how can it be useful? Fear is something that's very misunderstood in our society and something which I think is thoroughly abused in many, many different ways. But why do we get fearful? Where does this come from? Well, it's a defense mechanism. Your body is built in such a way that when it senses danger and it believes that there is a real and present danger, it sets off a sequence of internal reactions which put you into an altogether different state. A state where you are far more capable of being able to run or fight or do something like this, which could be really useful in a dangerous situation. But let's go a bit deeper. Let's look at how that works. So something happens, loud noise, scary thing, whatever it may be, and the nervous system picks up on that. Okay, bing, there's something over there. This is something that could be scary. Now this sends a signal into the part of the brain called the amygdala. Now the amygdala is responsible more often than not. It's like the emotional brain, if you like. It's the emotional part of the brain. And it's a very, very important part, just as a side note here, in creating subjective memories, because it essentially creates these subjective memories and puts them into a part of the brain, adjacent part of the brain called the hippocampus. So the amygdala is really powerful. It affects memories, it affects reactions, it affects a lot of different things. And what the amygdala then does is it receives this signal and it says, right, okay, let me attach an appropriate emotion to this. That's danger. Let me attach fear. Sends the signal down. Now this signal goes down to a part of your body in the torso. The name escapes me in this moment, but this part of the body, I want to say thyroid, I don't think that's true or accurate, but this part of the body essentially then sends neurotransmitters around the body. So it receives the message from the amygdala, right, okay, there's danger, we need to react, pow, let me send out some chemicals all around this wonderful body and let me trigger it into doing something different. Now the predominant chemical that I want to reference here is a chemical called cortisol. Now, cortisol has a very powerful effect on you. What cortisol can do immediately is it essentially focuses a lot more of your body's energy into fight and flee systems rather than cognitive function. So you become a stupider version of yourself, albeit probably faster and a bit stronger, and definitely more aggressive. And you can kind of see a use for that. Well, you definitely can see a use for that. I mean, if I'm hunter-gatherer 2,000 years ago and I'm in the jungle and some wild boar jumps out at me screeching at the top of its voice, then I don't want to stand there and have a coherent conversation with the thing. I either want to, defend myself or I want to climb a tree and hide, depending, I guess, on what kind of hunter-gatherer I am. So it's really useful in different times. And we have these accompanying chemicals, adrenaline, which most people have heard of, which pumps you up, gets you going, and glutamate, which has a similar kind of effect. And glutamate and adrenaline are dumped into the system as well to really turn up the flavor of the cortisol. So if the cortisol is being pumped around the body and it's like, this stress feeling, but your nervous system has determined this is real danger, then a lot more glutamate and adrenaline is produced in order to really amp up the effects of the cortisol. And again, we can see huge benefits if you're being attacked in the middle of a forest or whatever it may be. But let's look at our lives, because very few of us live the hunter-gatherer existence. I've got to say, it sounds fantastic. A great way of living, completely self-sustainable and off-grid. But for most of us, that's just not a possibility, and it's just not something that's probably going to happen at any point soon. And that's because our societies have evolved to protect us, to create infrastructure around us, which supposedly helps with education, healthcare, all of these different things. And essentially, we've created this bubble around us. So our societies have evolved very quickly, relatively speaking. Quicker than our bodies have anyway. Because we're left now in a situation where we very rarely have to deal with a tiger attack or a crazy wild boar running through the jungle or that big-ass grizzly bear over there. We very rarely have to deal with that. What we have to deal with now are maybe your partner receiving a phone call from an ex-lover, or maybe a bill coming through your letterbox which you are neither aware was coming or cannot afford to pay, or your boss, after reviewing a piece of work you're particularly proud of, turns around and reacts really negatively to it, putting you in fear that you're going to lose your job. Like, these are the kind of things now that trigger fear in most people. And in pretty much every kind of fear situation you could imagine in our modern world, the response that we have built in is just way over the top now. Now, there are still situations, you're crossing the road, you're not paying attention, nor to you, and all of a sudden, meep, meep, turn around, there's a bus there. Now, in that situation, I probably want cortisol to be dumped over. I want to be rapid, and I want to be strong, and I want to be able to jump out the way. So there is still situations, mugging and violent crimes are apparent in our society. They are relatively common in certain areas. So again, I'm not saying they're completely redundant, but I'm saying for the vast majority of the situations you find yourself fearful in, the response that we've evolved, the defense mechanism, is just far too excessive. It's far too over the top. But what is the problem with that? Now, what is that? Well, here's the problem: is that when cortisol is produced, you essentially become a stupider version of yourself. In the instance that you become a stupider version of yourself, but are under no direct attack, let's use one of the examples I gave. A bill comes through the letterbox that you can't afford to pay and that you didn't expect. And this starts triggering survival concerns within you. It starts to get you worried, and cortisol is produced. You start to get stressed. You start to get aggy. You start to get wound up. Oh, why is this happening? Why is this always me? The victim mentality comes in. This can escalate as little or as much as it wants, really, depending on your engagement with it. But let's stay with this situation, this example here. So this happens. You then find yourself in a far less coherent position than you would do normally. And what happens? Your partner then comes up to you and says, "Oh, hey, by the way, I forgot to mention, the kids need a new pair of school shoes each. That's £50 each. There's also the school uniform we have to get because it's the new term, and there's another £300-400 there. And while we're at it, I need to put some, fill up the petrol tank, and we need a week's worth of food. So I'm going to spend about £1,000 today." Now, in this example, this person already triggered, already feeling the effects of cortisol, related to the feeling of scarcity attached to that bill. Their partner is just telling them what they need, what the house needs for workability, what the children need for workability. This is not an unreasonable request in any way, but because you may find yourself under these effects, you react terribly. There's a beautiful German saying which says that you shouldn't break too much china because then we can't have dinner. Something to that effect. I'm sure my German friends will correct me, and I hope you will at least. And essentially what this means is that we can't allow ourselves, when triggered in these situations, to lash out and be horrible to those around us. That being the breaking of the china. Because if we continue to do that, then there'll be no china, good faith and relationship between you on which to share a meal. So you basically destroy the relationship, is the crux of that. And if you have in your life multiple triggers which set you off into this cortisol cocktail party in your head, then you have multiple points in your life which are just pushing you into angry states in which you can, upset somebody in your house, have a go at a work colleague, speak to your child in a way that's condescending, patronizing, and that you don't normally do. Any one of these things, any spectrum of ill behavior. So that's the short-term effect. You can basically F up your entire life, like in the heat of the moment. But the long-term effects are equally as devastating. The long-term effects of being in this crisis response system almost full-time are that the presence of cortisol over long periods of time in your body creates a whole host of problems. It increases anxiety, insomnia, depression. It creates thyroid problems, which then affect your weight. It's just this cascade of different things. And your body is not designed to live in a state of stress, continuous stress. It has mechanisms inside it that are designed to deal with stress and allow you to move through difficult situations. But to stay in that stress state is not healthy. So, we may ask ourselves a couple of questions at this point. If it's not healthy to stay in this state of fear, why in our society is fear such a commonly used tool, especially in the media? Well, my argument for that would be quite simply, the media has no interest in informing you and doing what the media should do. The media wants to scare you. The media wants to create fear within your body, so this cortisol is produced, you're a stupider version of yourself, and you feel the need to reach out to these publications to make sure you're protected, because clearly they know what's going on. It's the media model. They play on fear. Now, when you then understand the effects of long-term exposure to these chemicals, you then realize the damage that big media and other organizations as such, and other industries as such, are doing to humanity. They are not just creating stressed out people in the moment who then lash out at their family. Because again, you see something on the front page of the newspaper, and I did a few years ago, where there was a Syrian father in the refugee crisis, and he was holding his dead son on the beach. Son was the same age as my son, and it broke me, and I was so angry for days, and I lashed out at people. It wasn't their fault. They didn't do it. They didn't do anything wrong to me. I was just under the effect of a continued amount of cortisol because this just got me at a deep level. And that was the last time I read newspapers. I said to myself in that moment, this is bullshit. Like, this is crazy. How can I let the media almost have a backdoor into my mind to come and spike me with this horrific cortisol cocktail? It's absolutely ridiculous. And I locked it off. But this is the media. This is their game. And it's disgusting, because the long-term effects they create in our society are just awful. And if there's one industry that I could just completely destroy and have rebuilt from the ground up, it would be media. Big Pharma's disgusting as well, if you ask me. But hey, let me put my soapbox to one side. I don't want to turn this into a rant about the industries I don't like. That's not what we're here for. Stay with fear. So we can see then that we live in a society which triggers these states which in the moment make us a less effective, more stupid version of ourselves, but in the long run create all kind of manner of really, really detrimental, negative physical effects for us. So how do we deal with this? I kind of sound like a bit of a doomsday guy right now because I talked about the challenges and everything. But that's really not it. This that I've been describing to you is the result of an untethered relationship with fear, and misunderstood relationship with fear. Because when you truly and deeply understand fear and how it can be used, it becomes a superpower. And this is what I find most exciting. I look at every single gift that we've been given through evolution. All of these phenomenal little intricacies of the human mind, body, and soul. And I look at fear as being this insanely powerful one. Not in so much that if you induce fear in others, you gain control, because while that is true, I think it's disgusting. But I mean, in order to channel that fear through yourself, in order to realign your surface triggers that send that signal down into a core of you and bring up this feeling of fear and the production of cortisol into your body. Reprogramming those triggers is the key, because you can then remove the unhelpful ones. Like, I don't want to be triggered when a bill comes through my door. So let me go through the process, the defined process of removing that trigger. Really, really a very effective process. But let me go through that. So the next time a bill comes through my door that I can't afford to pay, I'm composed and I'm separate from it, and it's not attached. I'm able to be an intelligent version of myself. But now let's start maybe creating a trigger in different situations. Now again, we have a conversation about the ins and outs of your life. We can maybe find areas to use this. For me, I find the feeling of fear uncomfortable. So I realize that when I actually am feeling fearful, if I can get it in the first few moments, then I'm able to almost use it as a reason to throw myself forward. So let me give you an example. I have created within me a trigger, a surface trigger. So a trigger that can be interact with the outside world. Now this surface trigger, it's there and it's designed to go off in the moments that somebody that I'm working with questions my integrity in some way. Now, that may sound weird, but I'm really key on working at a very high level of integrity with people. And sometimes in life we can get caught up in our own shit and that can slip. So I have used this trigger as a marker. So if I'm reading that somebody is questioning my integrity, if they do directly question it, then I have that trigger very solidly connected with two core human fears. The first one being a loss of connection, and the second one being ego death, so the fear of shame. So when one of these issues is raised, it kind of puts me into those feelings. Shame is a terribly destructive thing. But in the moment, it's so much of an ugly feeling that it's like a little fire is lit underneath me. And I'm like, oh, God, okay, I need to step up. And then the power of this is this. You could argue, well, hold on a minute. Why set up the trigger? If someone tells you you're out of integrity, then just address it. And that's fine. But sometimes hearing something intellectually isn't enough to drive forward a shift. So in establishing this trigger, I know that what happens is somebody questions this. Hey, Nick, I'm not quite sure if your work on this project was as good as it could have been. Ooh. Trigger. Ooh, starting to feel, I don't like that comfort. Okay, what's the next thing I can do? Do you know what? I feel everything you've just said. How can we work this out? It's not my intention at all. My intention is to work with integrity here. So how can we work this out? Now, this connection and the depth at which I allow this to go creates this overwhelming power and desire to address and correct this problem. Like an urge that I very rarely felt at any other area of my life. And there it's become really powerful. So I've installed this trigger so that in those particular moments, the entire system, the crisis system is switched on, and I allow it, and I have enough separation from it to then be able to say, oh, it's switched on. That's enough of a kick in the arse to make me turn up my game. So that's one example. And again, there are many, many examples. The complexities of us as humans mean that there are so many different variations of variants of what we can do. But that for me is fear. And just to summarize all the stuff I've said here, fear is this autonomous with this automatic system in our body. It is there to put us in an altered state when there is a real and present threat of danger so that we can stay alive. Our societies have evolved far quicker than our bodies have, so our bodies are still trained for that level of fear reaction, but our societies mean we don't kind of need it. The result of that is that we have this crisis situation turned on almost continuously for things which are not an actual crisis. This truth of humans has resulted in industries like Big Pharma and the media using this knowledge to basically drive people into stressed out, sick versions of themselves in order to get their money and their attention. And they can be removed. Triggers to fears which produce this cortisol can be removed altogether. They can be altered and new ones can be installed. So you can entirely realign your relationship to fear, and in doing so, you can make yourself almost oblivious to any of this external nonsense that triggers you now, and you can introduce a superpower within inside you, which is almost like a button that you push to switch on a surge of energy to come out. So, fear is maybe one of my favorite things now, which from a guy who used to get anxious and hide and not be able to speak in moments of stress, that's quite a journey. I hope this has been useful. As always with everything, reach out if you have any questions or if you disagree with anything I say. They're my favourite ones, to be fair, because it always starts great conversation. Thank you. Have a beautiful day. I'll see you soon.